Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, the last of the Ptolemies, one of history's most famous women. What did she look like? At one end, we have 1963's somewhat unrealistic blue-eyed Cleopatra portrayed by Elizabeth Taylor. On the other, we have the recent Netflix reinterpretation that depicts her as a black woman. It seems like we just can't come to terms, can we? Well, there are plenty of coins that show her portrait. We could simply look at them, but that would be a bit too simplistic. We need to delve deeper. Can coins even be used as a reliable source of information as to what she looked like? If they are a reliable source, do the portraits match historical sources on her appearance? Let's try solving this mystery. And today, to help us, I'm enlisting the help of the Numismatic collection from the Royal Library of Belgium, as they so kindly filmed me some of their very rare coins from their inventory featuring her image. How cool is that? As always, we need some historical context first. Our Cleopatra, the Cleopatra, was actually the seventh given this name. She reigned between 51 and 30 BC, the last ruler of the legendary Ptolemaic dynasty, a dynasty of Greek pharaohs, descendants of Ptolemy I, one of the generals and successors of Alexander the Great. The lineage of Ptolemy commanded great respect in Mediterranean politics. They had ruled for centuries over a wealthy nation such as Egypt, but by her time, the kingdom was a pale shadow of its former self. In practical terms, it was a client state of Rome, really. Cleopatra understood very well she was the ruler of a weakened nation, the last independent Greek kingdom in a Mediterranean dominated by the juggernaut that was Rome. She also understood the glory days of her dynasty were in the past. Her father was Ptolemy XII, also known as Ptolemy Auletes, meaning the flute player, as it seems like he was more interested with the arts and music than the proper management of the kingdom. That's exactly what the Roman elites thought of Egypt, a decadent, mismanaged kingdom, soon to be annexed, just like the others. And here is where Cleopatra's diplomatic gifts shined. We will get into the part of her physical appearance shortly. She seems to have been pretty, but not something out of this world. Her personality, however, inspired quotes from Roman writers, such as, "She possessed a most charming voice and a knowledge of how to make herself agreeable to everyone, being brilliant to look upon and to listen to, with the power to subjugate everyone." And another one says, "Conversing with her had an irresistible charm. Her presence, combined with the persuasiveness of her behavior towards others, had something stimulating about it. There was sweetness in the tones of her voice, and her tongue, like an instrument of many strings, she could readily turn to whatever language she pleased." Wow, huh? This last part is interesting. She spoke multiple different languages, so she must have been incredibly intelligent. She played to her natural talents brilliantly by seducing the most powerful men of Rome, first Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony, and she turned them into allies. She did miracles to re-establish a degree of geopolitical respectability to Egypt. As we will see shortly on her coins, she wanted to transform the eastern provinces of Rome, merge Egypt with them, creating a new political entity around the eastern Mediterranean based on her new Romano-Egyptian dynasty with Antony, ruled from Egypt and supported by her new powerful Roman allies. However, as we know, history followed a different path. Mark Antony, her main supporter, ended up being defeated by Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, and Cleopatra decided to commit suicide rather than be paraded as a prisoner and the failed seductress in Rome. So, with that brief introduction out of the way, let's look at today's coins. First of all, let's set up a base. Are Egyptian coins a reliable source to visualize the physical appearance of the Ptolemies? Cleopatra lived during the last years of the Hellenistic period. This was a time marked by wars between the Greek kingdoms of the Eastern Mediterranean, and also a time of intrigue, civil wars, and pretenders constantly fighting for the thrones of these kingdoms. Personal propaganda became incredibly important for every monarch trying to reinforce his legitimacy, so portrait art on coins was highly developed, showing the true appearance of monarchs with remarkable quality. As I'm explaining you this, we're looking at an example. What we have on screen is Ptolemy IV, who reigned between 224 and 204 BC. Notice there's a lot of intricacies on the portrait, conveying as much information about his appearance as possible. His slightly chubby face, very curly hair, the pointy chin that was a typical trait of the Ptolemies. He also wears a cloak worn by soldiers on campaign, representing his willingness to fight for his legitimacy. And on his head, most important, he wears the royal headband, the main symbol of sovereignty of Greek kings. The reverse features the eagle, the symbol of the god Zeus and the main emblem of the Ptolemaic kings, with a very simple inscription, Ptolemaiou Basileus, of King Ptolemy. Here's another piece, a gold 100 drachma coin, struck for Ptolemy V, who ruled between 205 and 180 BC. In the second example, we can validate my previous claim that the Egyptian artists were skilled enough to make individualized portraits. As we can see here, we have a clearly different portrait of a younger man, a young king, now with a wavy rather than curly hair. He also seems to be much thinner than his predecessor, and the die engraver curiously made him with these huge bulging eyes. Despite looking like a young man, maybe even a teenager, he still wears the royal headband and the cloak used by soldiers, reinforcing that aspect of royal propaganda on coins I mentioned previously. As for the reverse, it's just like the previous coin, but on gold. We have that wonderful eagle on the reverse, with Ptolemaiou Basileus on the legends. But could the die engravers also make realistic images of women? Yes, they could. Here we have Queen Arsinoe III, who lived between 235 and 204 BC, the great-great-great-aunt of Cleopatra. Of course, we can't use someone so far removed from Cleopatra chronologically as a reference to what she looked like, but in this portrait we can see some of the typical features of the Ptolemies once again, particularly the pointy chin and the very pronounced nose. Apart from the Egyptian tradition of intermarrying close relatives, the Ptolemies also married other people from Macedonian Greek origins, as well as some members of the Seleucid kings of Syria. Now, the Seleucids were originally Macedonian, but they also married and intermixed with noble families of Persian origin. So evidence points to the Ptolemies, as we can see on the portrait of Arsinoe here, being predominantly of Southern European appearance, with white to olive skin tones and probably black to brown hair. Although the later Ptolemies, and that includes Cleopatra, could have, as I said, like Persian, Eastern, like Middle Eastern traits to her appearance as well. And just quickly going over the reverse, we have a wonderful depiction of the Horn of Abundance, the cornucopia, with the legends Arsinoe Philopatoros, meaning Arsinoe, she who honors her fathers, she who honors her ancestors. Alright, since we now know Hellenistic coins have the level of visual quality to accurately convey visual information, let's finally have a closer look at a coin featuring Cleopatra. Here is a bronze piece struck at Alexandria, the capital. It has a dark patina, so the drawings will help us see the main features of the image a bit better. First of all, her hair. Very interesting. She seems to have very curly hair, like wavy, but very wavy, nearly curly, which goes in line with the busts that we've discovered that are attributed to her father, Ptolemy XII, and the most likely candidate to have been her mother, Cleopatra V. We aren't exactly sure who her mom was. It could have also been a concubine. But the idea here is that this depiction of a woman with very wavy, nearly curly hair is consistent with her parents' appearance. As for the color of her hair, a painting found at Herculaneum gives us an interesting twist to things, showing her with very light brown hair. In fact, she almost looks like a redhead here. Another painting found at Pompeii has an image of Venus and a little Cupid. This painting was most likely inspired on a statue commissioned by Julius Caesar, meant to represent Cleopatra and their son, Caesarion. Here we once again have the image of a very pale woman with amber-colored eyes and very light brown hair with this wavy texture. We need to be careful with taking these two images at face value. They're both posthumous images, made around a century after Cleopatra, but they definitely point in the direction of her hair having been some shade of brown, some shade of light brown. Still looking at her hair here, the last interesting thing to note is that she's wearing the royal diadem, the first queen to ever be shown wearing the diadem typically worn by kings. She wanted to show, even in smaller denominations like this coin, that she held executive power over Egypt. Very interesting and relevant information. On the reverse, we have, once again, at the center of the symbol, the Ptolemaic eagle, and around it, the legends. Cleopatra Basilissa, Queen Cleopatra, proudly displaying her command over Egypt. To the right of the eagle, we have a Greek letter that represents the number 80. We aren't sure if these are meant to be 80 drachma or some sort of fractional unit, but at that time, Egypt was suffering with the debasement of its currency, and as a consequence with inflation. So this could very well be an 80 drachma coin, laying bare a reality of very heavy inflation in Egypt. Now here's another piece with her bust. This is a 40 units or 40 drachma coins, so half the weight and half the value of the previous coin. We will use this example to go over that very prominent aquiline nose that we have here. While it is true that on the paintings we've just seen, and particularly on marble portraits, we can appreciate her nose isn't exactly small, still, it seems exaggerated here. I mean, it's massive. And I theorize this was done on purpose. Let's remember coins were propaganda tools for one's legitimacy to rule. And it's a little bit weird, but a big hooked nose was at the time connected to masculine attributes expected from a ruler: decisiveness, energy, masculinity. So it's not a very feminine feature, but that's the point. She was not meant to be shown on coins as this beautiful Egyptian queen, but as someone competent who could get the job done. A queen, a proper queen. Once more going over the reverse, we have the Ptolemaic eagle at the center of the design. To the right, the number 40, and around the legends, Cleopatra Basilissa, Queen Cleopatra. And then we have this amazing coin, one of the coolest pieces of it I have ever featured on this channel. This tetradrachma was likely struck at Antioch in 37 BC, when Cleopatra was partnered up with Mark Antony. I'm actually going to start with the reverse on this coin. Let's look at Mark Antony first. It will help us understand Cleopatra's portrait on the other side. So, there he is, Mark Antony, the man that had everything to be the first Roman emperor, but wasn't. By the time this piece was made, I would say portrait art on Roman coins was a bit less refined than that of the Greeks. Portraits on coins were not a new thing for the Romans, but they had only been putting images of living people on coins for a decade or so. And the Romans preferred a more veristic style to portraits, that is, more realistic, including signs of age or features that might be considered unattractive. This wasn't simply because they appreciated portraits being visually accurate, just for them being accurate, but it was a cultural thing for the Romans. They were generally more pragmatic. It was a good thing to be experienced, to be battle-hardened, to have a couple of wrinkles, a couple of scars, even if it meant your face wouldn't look as pristine, as spotless as that on the Greek coins. With that in mind, we can now understand that despite being a less refined portrait artistically, here we have exactly the message that Antony wanted to pass on his coins. This masculine, experienced veteran Romans could support and could trust. And the somewhat exaggerated facial features show it. Very strong jawline, strong cheekbones, protruding brow ridge, this straight, big, slightly aquiline nose. And they're all represented here. And on the legends, which are in Greek, as it was struck in the Greek-speaking part of the Roman territory, it reads, Antonios autocrator, tritor triun andron, meaning Antonius, imperator, kind of like general. So Antonius imperator for the third year, reinforcing this idea of military experience and strength he wanted to pass across, especially since Octavian by that time was doing all he could to stain Antony's reputation, portraying him back in Rome as a once great man, a great Roman, emasculated by that Egyptian seductress. And then we get to the obverse, where we have Cleopatra. This is a much larger coin with much more detail than the bronze coins we saw earlier. But you know what? In my opinion, this coin is actually not as good conveying information as to what she looked like. By the time this coin was made, she was around 32 years old, but it's almost like she's a middle-aged woman here. She just looks so different from the bronze coins and from her marble portraits. So what's going on here? Notice how lots of her facial features emulate those found on Mark Antony. That's why I showed you the reverse of the coin first. This might have been simply due to the fact the engraver had never seen a portrait of Cleopatra to use as a reference, but the Romans always had this thing of showing the portraits of their women on coins with lots of features of their husbands, like visual features. This tradition actually continued well into the imperial period, with very few Roman empresses ever being depicted on coins as they actually looked like. Some of them basically looked like the emperor wearing a wig. So with that in mind, let's break it down. Let's break this image down. First, once again, her hair. This part is actually quite similar to what we've seen in the Egyptian bronzes. Her very wavy, almost curly hair tied to a bun on the back of her head, and the royal diadem showing she was a monarch on her own right. Then we get to her face. Here is where we see a lot of features emulating Mark Antony. Her jaw is much stronger here, giving her a very masculine appearance. The same goes for her very prominent brow ridge, sunken eyes, all very similar to Antony. They seem to have gotten the nose right, the same prominent aquiline nose from the bronzes. But once again, it's worth wondering if she had such a massive, such a pronounced nose, or if this can be explained once more by the cultural context that connected a more prominent nose to masculine, assertive traits that were expected from a monarch. The legends are very interesting. They give us a clue to Cleopatra's political ambitions. It reads, Basilissa Cleopatra, so once again, Queen Cleopatra, Thea Neotera, the young goddess. There is a superficial, more obvious interpretation to this. She was a Ptolemy. The Ptolemies were pharaohs, and pharaohs were gods. She was a living goddess for her subjects. She styled herself as the goddess Isis because in the eyes of the Egyptian people, she was indeed a living deity. Apart from her claims to godhood, Cleopatra was smart. She had territorial claims. She actually was expansionist. She wanted to rule over the Eastern Mediterranean. This coin was likely struck in Antioch. Antioch was the old capital of the rivals of the Ptolemies, the defunct Seleucid Empire, once the most powerful successor kingdom of Alexander. One of its most famous queens of the Seleucids was called Cleopatra Thea, so another Cleopatra, in this case a Syrian Cleopatra. She was a very powerful Seleucid queen who ruled from Antioch. By calling herself Thea Neothera, the new goddess, Cleopatra could be advertising herself as the successor of this powerful Seleucid queen, laying claims to the region, to Antioch. So, after looking at lots of coins and after a lot of discussion, we need some answers, don't we? Let me put a cutout of her portraits on the screen and ask once again the question: can we use coins as material evidence to see how Cleopatra looked like? Yes, we can. But, as we've seen, it's not that simple. Coins were political instruments, and we always have to remember this when discussing coin portraiture. In any case, we can at least make an educated guess with some degree of certainty. Well, I think we can disprove the Black Cleopatra theory. I personally like a reconstruction of her face made by the World History Encyclopedia. I think it gets very close. I'm putting it on the screen now. She was white, most likely with a darker olive skin tone, light brown eyes, and wavy brown hair. And it really surprised me that apparently she had this reddish hue to her hair, according to the paintings in Pompeii and Herculaneum. This was for me the most surprising discovery when doing research, as I would have expected dark brown or even black hair. Of course, we can't discard these possibilities as well. She most likely had an aquiline nose, although not as exaggerated as on her coins, and I would guess it was slightly larger than what's dictated by our modern canons of beauty as being ideal. But that's the point. She wasn't a woman of breathtaking beauty. She was, however, incredibly intelligent, and she knew how to make the most of her physical appearance, but especially of her people skills. If I could have a conversation with anyone from ancient history, she would be nearly at the top of my list. I would love to witness her talents as she captivated people around her. So, now we have a numismatically backed answer, or at least an approximation of what Cleopatra most likely looked like. What do you think? I want to hear from you. What did she look like in your opinion? I hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to leave a like and consider subscribing if you did. Thank you very much for the Royal Library of Belgium for providing me footage of these incredible coins. And as always, happy collecting, and I'll see you soon.